Okay, what is 40k Reforged? It's 40k rebuilt from the ground up by 40k veterans. We all came together at the start of 10th edition after studying some games design and some player psychology and game theory to figure out what makes 40k tick and what doesn't make it tick. There were a lot of expectations shattered over the years, but years is the key word there. We have been playtesting and adjusting and iterating on this version for many years. To cut to the chase, this is a version of tabletop Warhammer, far cleaner, far smoother, more fun, more intuitive, more engaging than any version of 40k ever. The three main things we try to do is guarantee the factions fantasy. So, not going to get into it. Guarantee the factions fantasy. We maximize that fantasy as best as we can without overcomplicating the mechanics. We try to find the minimum amount of complication necessary to elicit the highest level of faction fantasy possible. And that also ties into the third point, which is simple core gameplay loop. It's not that hard. You're moving models around and throwing dice at each other. Shouldn't be that hard. Those are the three. If you want to come in and check it out, it's in the Discord, 40k Reforged. I'll put a link down below in the description on the pinned comment or whatever. I know that you'll like it. No one that came from Games Workshop 40k has touched this game and been able to go back. Now, having said all that, let's maybe start to unpack some of why this exists, how this came to exist, and what it is. What's the problem with normal 40k? This is where my notes come in. I Go You Go causes 45-minute turns. It causes alpha strikes, where the vast majority of your army interacts with their army all at once, and because there's 2,000 points on the board, you actually have to have the damage so high that causes alpha strikes. It's the combination of 2,000 point games and I Go You Go that causes these alpha strike issues. This is a big problem for engagement. You just stand there and get shot at for half an hour. This is a big problem with analysis paralysis. Analysis paralysis is where players look at the board state and they start calculating all the possible lines. It's very stressful, it's very exhausting. The way to fix that is by reducing the amount that you can affect the game per turn. How do you do that? Alternating activations. That's how you do it. Because if you can't affect the board very much in each individual unit's turn, your opponent is going to get the chance to do something before you get to activate a different unit, which means the board state will change before you get to make a new decision. So it's much, much simpler to figure out which unit you need to activate now and then do its thing, and then you just let your opponent figure out what to do next. Games Workshop actually did make an alternating activations version of 40k. I'm blanking, I forgot the name now. However, it's clear to me now, watching 10th edition rollout, watching 9th edition rollout, watching 8th edition rollout, that their development cycles are so quick that they do not have time to play test this stuff properly before it gets pushed out. So what they end up doing is they end up leaning on old technologies, old rules. So you end up with I Go You Go until the end of time. The other problem is that there's too many factions. I've done it now, and I'm not even done. That's how you end up with like a whole swath of units that just have a nothing rule and a 4-up invuln save. While this guy's leading a unit, have your lethal hits or whatever. It's just like, they don't have time for this. And they don't have time to get into the weeds of the player incentives and figure out what the aesthetic is of a unit, and then figure out what the dynamic of that unit is supposed to be to elicit that aesthetic, and then go down to the mechanics and figure that out. They don't have time for that. We do. We, as a community, have the time for that. And we have been doing that. We've combined all of our gamer brains to figure out the essence of games design. Maybe me a little bit more on that side, but there's also this dance of receiving feedback and then figuring out the root cause of their feedback and then making changes and going back and forth and just iterating. All great games are created out of good games and then iterated on until they become great games. And we wrote a good game 4 years ago, and we have been iterating on it for 4 years. Since the start, is it 4 years? So since the start of 10th edition, basically. Somewhere about halfway through 9th edition, I wrote a prototype version of an alternating activation system for 9th edition. I let that sit for like a year or something, and then because I didn't want to be all in on redesigning 40k if 10th edition was going to be great, So I waited for 10th edition. 10th edition arrives, and well, here we are. I've got my own 40k game now. 40k Reforged is not a balanced pass. It's not a homebrew based on previous editions. It is the collective effort of an entire play group to learn the essence of games design and attack the problem of wargaming at its core for 4 years. Everything from randomized movement, battle shock, the psychic phase, and the mission. All the missions feel bad in normal Games Workshop stuff. And just one system at a time, and then we run it, and then we figure out where the incentives are undesirable, where we look at undesirable dynamics, and then we ask, where do they come from? Where do these undesirable mechanics come from? We had like a capture the flag mode at some point where units were running away from enemy units, and we go, okay, running away from your opponent is the opposite of a desirable mechanic. Then you get to say, we made a change and then they started running away from people. Well, what happens if you don't just go back to square one, you go back to square -1, where how do I make the units interact with each other as much as possible? And then you design the mission based on that. You make further iterations out from that. And then you just follow the correct path, the path that leads to the most desirable play patterns. Let's take an example before we sign off. Let's talk about Harlequins. I'm quite proud of this extremely simple rule that plays directly into the alternating activations system. The Harlequins army rule is where you can pick one of your units after your opponent's move, and then you roll a d6 in the tray. And it's a 5-up. If it's a 5-up, you get to move your unit. It's dodging. It's not neg1 to hit, it's just dodging. It's about perfect information. If you don't have perfect information, neither does your opponent. That allows the dynamic of dodging to appear, because if it was a 0-up to save and it was just a once per battle round, then your opponent knows that you can do that 100% of the time at the perfect time, and then they can play around that information. But if you relinquish that information for yourself, you also take away the knowledge from your opponent as well. After I discovered that, I used that technology a few times. That would be like reactive shooting, like overwatching. That would be Canoptic Doomstalker has like a sentry ability that does that. Another one is the Tyranids. The Tyranids army rule, one of their army rules is Overwhelming Swarm, where when you kill one of their Overwhelming Swarm units, that's Hormigorns, Gargoyles, Termagants, and Carnifexes, on a 5-up, that unit goes back into reserves at full health. You just get another one. So you're going to have to kill 1.3 times of the Tyranids Overwhelming Swarm units, it's very important that it's on a 5-up each time something dies rather than once per battle round. We can talk about all that later. Oh, there's so much to talk about. I think I've done enough damage to this video already. I'll be active in the comments, so you might as well go down there and click the Discord thing. the Discord invite and jump in there and have a look at some of your rules. I've got a lot to talk about. Any questions, hit me up or make a video. Just put them in the comments. Pages and pages and pages of theory and notes and rants and just me figuring out 40K. I hope that made something approaching sense. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. I'll see you later.